we are going to talk, hopefully together, about the scary stuff and how to approach that with our children. While I wait for a second for some people to join, just want to remind you about the holiday ebook that Sonlight is advertising right now. Also, we have 3 really great Advent studies. If you have never done any of those Advent unit studies, you might enjoy seeing if you can get your hands on one of those and do that. So let's get started. And I always like to do this and set my timer and make sure I'm not just going on and on forever. The question that I have is how to address hard current events going on in the world. What and how do you discuss these with your children? So I want to back up several years. My oldest daughter was just over 3, about 3.5, when 9/11 happened. And so I had a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old. That was an incredible day. And I was trying to think back to that and remember just all the ways we had to handle that. I remember really specifically not showing my girls the TV, and they could tell that, well, my oldest could tell that mommy wasn't quite right. But we would just say, you know what, some bad men did some things to hurt people in our country, so we need to pray. And one thing that I would recommend, especially if you have very young children, is to guard and protect them from images that are too much for them to grasp and to understand. There is no reason to scare children unnecessarily and frighten them. Now, that doesn't mean that they're not ever going to see something that's scary, but my caution to you is, do your children see you scrolling newsfeed constantly or having news on a television or something that's scrolling all the time that could really be presenting them with this huge issue that they have no grid through which to process it? Does that make sense? So I would just love for you to think about that children don't have the background or the filters that you have to be able to even handle it. So is it necessary for them to know and to see and all of that? I think it is your job as the adult in the room to guard them and protect them from things that are too overwhelming. And when there are things that they hear and see, then trying to pull that down into their world where they can understand it. So bring it to their level, right? Like, why are these people doing these bad things to each other? Well, I would love for you to say to them, why do people do bad things to each other ever? Why do you smack your sister? Why do you take things that don't belong to you? Why do you ever tell a lie to mommy or daddy? I think you should take every opportunity to point your kids to James chapter 4. I have it right here. I'm going to read it. James chapter 4. What is the source of wars and fights among you? This has to do with not just countries, but people, right? What is the source of wars and fights among you? Don't they come from your passions that wage war within you? You desire and do not have. You murder and covet and cannot obtain. You fight and wage war. You do not have because you do not ask. You ask and don't receive because you ask with wrong motives. But at the beginning there, what is the source of wars and fights? You desire and do not have. You covet and cannot obtain. That is pretty much the source of all of it, right? Why did Russia go into Ukraine? They coveted. They wanted it. Yeah. Why are Hamas and Israel fighting like this? They each want something. Yeah. And obviously, Hamas went into Israel and committed atrocities, and we have actually, it's kind of amazing listening to a podcast about this, the just warfare idea, which really came out of Christian theism, that there is a just war to be waged. So countries have every right to protect themselves. So there are all of these things, and I think when our children are little, to bring that down to their level too, like, okay, this is what's going on the world stage, just like it goes on in here, and what's the answer for that? So I have something from a mom. We struggle with telling or showing our daughter what is happening because she gets scared about what could happen here. Yeah, which is exactly right to say we're going to limit what she sees. And again, I think for small children, images are so frightening, and they get in their heads, which is why I protected, when my children were small, I protected them from movies, a lot of things. That doesn't mean we never watched anything. It means I was very, very careful. And you have to know your children. Like I have, I want to say that with a caveat. When children are young, I think you should really protect them from images that are dark and scary. But you are going to have some children that are much more sensitive to that than others. I have one daughter that if she saw anything the remotest bit scary, she would have dreams about it. And I have others that seem completely unfazed, don't even remember. So that is something you need to really think about as you analyze what you're allowing your kids to see. Yes, showing what's happening, she can get scared that it happens here. And again, it can happen here. That's the reality. So for one thing, we don't need to engender fear, right? We don't need to make fear more bigger than it needs to be, like the events that are bigger than they need to be, okay? I don't know how to say this. I think some of us are so wrapped up with current events and things that are happening all over the world that we borrow that fear and impose it on ourselves and lose the joy that we have in our daily living. Does that make sense? And I think that old saying, ignorance is bliss, is really a good one. And not to bury your head in the sand, but do I need to know every single difficult thing that's happening in the world? I don't. And I don't need to burden my children with that. And especially when they're young, especially when they're little, I do need to give them a grid to process it through. And if it is in their face, hopefully we've given them a grid. And I'm going to talk about that in a second. Now, if you're talking about 7th through 12th grade children, that's a little bit of a different ballgame. That's when their brains are developing differently and they're starting to be able to think through some bigger things. And I think it's really appropriate to talk about things they might have seen or have questions about it and discuss it. Absolutely. I would commend to you something like World Watch. My 8th grader watches World Watch every day. And we often have really great discussions about it. And I haven't noticed that it makes her afraid. Even I asked her the other day, what are you thinking about what's going on in Israel and with Hamas and all of that? Are you feeling nervous in any way about that? She said, not really. Okay, awesome. And so we move on. There are no doubt hard things happening in the world and will happen in our own families. So what's the grid for that? I just want to remind you of Psalm 46. And I'm going to read that to you. God is our refuge and strength, a helper who is always found in times of trouble. Therefore we will not be afraid, though the earth trembles and the mountains topple into the depths of the seas, though its water roars and foams and the mountains quake with its turmoil. Why? Because there is a river. Its streams delight the city of God, the holy dwelling place of the Most High. God is within her. She will not be toppled. God will help her when the morning dawns. Nations rage, kingdoms topple. The earth melts when he lifts his voice. The Lord of armies is with us. The God of Jacob is our stronghold. And then it goes on talking about how God will make wars cease. And he says, stop your fighting and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted on the earth. So there's a couple realities here. And the primary reality is there is a God in the universe who is in control and is sovereign, and nothing gets to us without his knowledge. And even in the hard things, he is there and we can trust him. It's sort of like the Proverbs 31 woman who smiles at the future, right? She's not consumed with fear, and she can smile at the future because God will be there. Does that mean nothing scary will happen? Of course not. We live in a sin-cursed, nasty world where people do not do things God's way, and we suffer the consequences. God hasn't made us robots. So let me say a couple more things. When you're dealing with scary stuff with your kids, I love this. This I got from Mr. Rogers. Is that okay? Does that count? Mr. Rogers would say, look for the helpers. When children find out about scary things, say a president is assassinated and they start to hear this long word, assassination. What is that? What's that talking about? I don't know about that. Say what it is. And then point out to them the helpers. I love that. The good people, the people who are kind, because there are so many more of them. I think back, 9/11 is a great example of that. Who were the helpers? Oh my goodness, these amazing firemen who gave their lives to try to rescue people, and the EMTs and the nurses and all the people and the police, and then the people who for days and days and days and months gave up their lives to dig through that rubble to find what they could find. And it's incredible. When there is a hard thing, point your kids to those helpers, look for them. And again, with little ones, what can we learn about how to treat others? Are these people being kind? No. Why? Why are they treating other people this way? They need Jesus. They don't see people as valuable. They're willing to hurt others. Point them to Scripture to show them this is not acceptable. And even when you are mean to your brother or sister, when you shove your brother off the bed, when you premeditatedly hurt him, how do we deal with that? That's coming from a hateful heart. That's coming from a place of not love, right? So even little, teaching our children to ask for forgiveness, and not just, I'm sorry I shoved you off the bed, but I'm sorry that I was unloving and shoved you off the bed. Will you forgive me? Because then we can address the heart. So here's the other thing. Moms or dads, whoever's watching, how are you doing with the scary stuff? Do you fill your mind with it? Do you have the news going on in the background all the time? I got to tell you, I like current events a lot. I used to teach government, and so I'm kind of a political, I like it. I like to know. I have had to learn as a parent, especially when I was a parent of smalls, to turn that off, to turn it off. I can, when they go to bed, I can catch up on the news. I get something in my my email from World News Group called The Sift, which gives me maybe the top 4 or 5 news stories of the day, and they approach things from a Christian worldview. I've enjoyed it. It's pretty objective. They're top 5 stories or so. So I'm not burying my head in the sand. I'm knowing, but you know what? We can get so obsessed with what's going on in the world, all these scary things in the world, that we can lose our joy and forget to take care of the people in our lives who are right in front of us. For instance, I have a sweet friend of a mom of 7 whose husband died 4 years ago this month. I could sit around thinking about how sad I am for everyone across the world who's in war-torn places, or I could make a meal for my friend and think about her pain and her hurt and enter into that because she's in my sphere of influence. So there is scary stuff. We acknowledge that to our children. There is a God who is in control and who loves us. We live in a world that is torn apart by sin, and we live with its consequences. We want people to know about Jesus and learn how to love each other, and that comes from him. So, I see a couple people on here, Laura Bryant and SLT 103. I don't know if either of you have any questions or comments, something I didn't touch on here. And if not, if there's anything, I would love to pray. It is hard, and I feel like maybe I'm repeating myself a little bit, but I think at a certain age, children don't need to know all the scary things, and I think we need to protect them. And again, when they do find out stuff, it's really helpful if we don't freak out. If we don't freak out, if we take them to the source of wisdom and protection and give it to Jesus and model to them how to give that to Jesus, I think that is the biggest thing. Don't scare them unnecessarily. They don't have the framework or the mental and psychological capacity to weed through all of it, and model to them trust in God. All right, let's pray. God, thank you that you are God and that we can trust you. And God, we ask for your mercy and for your grace. So many hurting people in this world, so much hard stuff. God, help us to know what things we need to be engaged with. Help us to be wise with our children, to know how to protect them as they're young, and then how to teach them how to think and process through these harder things as they get older. And then, God, most of all, will you help us to smile at the future and to model trust in you for our kids. We want to trust you. We want to not doubt. We want to believe that you are a good God who is wise and loving and just, and you will make all things right one day. And even now, we can trust you. Help us not to believe lies that Satan would throw our way, telling us to doubt you. Help us to be wise parents, good stewards of these precious children you've given us. In your name I pray, amen. And remember that there will be a time as they get older that you're going to have great discussions with them. Right now, my 21-year-old who's a senior in college, he and I have the most amazing discussions about current events and things that are going on. And I have just loved that. I have another daughter who will never talk about current events. They scare her. She's never wanted to listen to the news. She's 23 now. She's still really, she pays attention, she votes, all that kind of stuff, but she doesn't want to know it. It scares her. She'd prefer to just live life and not know. So it's interesting how God wires all of our children differently. And just know that you're doing a really good thing. As you read Sonlight's books, they delve into hard things. I'm thinking of a book called Endless Steppe that comes in, let's see, what level is that in? I think it's in H. And it's an amazing, I'm sorry, G. I think it's in G. No, it's an H, second world history, about what it was like to be taken over by the Soviet Union and sent into exile in Siberia. Incredible, just incredible, to live through that. And there's so many books that will give you opportunities to talk through hard stuff, and but in the comfort of your own living room, and yeah, point those kids back to Jesus, and point yourself back to Jesus. All right, we'll see you. Thanks for joining me. Bye-bye.